So a new report's come out from the Wall Street Journal that talks a bit more about Switch revisions or new systems in the Nintendo Switch console family. And we've talked about these before because if you remember, the Wall Street Journal talked about a revision, I believe, last year when they heard that new screens were being kind of looked at and produced and everything. Well, here we are now with the Wall Street Journal reporting from sources familiar with the situation, which sounds like, according to them, it has to do with manufacturers, developers, people who already have access to the prototype, that there are two Switch systems that could actually be introduced as early as this summer. So as early as 3 or 4 months, right? Could be an E3 announcement and then like a July or August release. It could also be something that's announced in the fall and then comes out in the holiday. It could also be something that's not at all announced this year at all, since this technically is a rumor. But the Wall Street Journal generally will look into this stuff, several different sources and everything, before they start posting on their website when it comes to this technology and everything. So this is actually one from Engadget, who did a good summary of it. The Wall Street Journal does have things locked behind like their paywall and everything, so even if I link you to it, you may not be able to read it. But I'll link you to this Engadget article, and I'll link you to the Wall Street Journal source straight up, just in case you do have a subscription, you can read it. So some of the interesting things here were they touch on basically what a lot of us figured. There would be a lower end model and then there would be a higher end model. So we'll have one that's cheaper and one that's more expensive, with the current Switch that we know now, like sitting right in the middle. So let's say we have a $300 Switch, we have a $200 Switch, then we have a $400 Switch, with the $400 one being a high-end one that's really geared more towards, I guess, the hardcore gamer scene, people who want better performance, higher resolution, all that stuff. Whereas the $200 one will, of course, be targeted towards families who want multiple Switch systems, or someone who wants to buy one for like a younger gamer, whether it's a younger nephew or a son or something like that. Or if you just want to get one at a cheaper rate, like the 2DS actually sold fairly well to all ages. So there you go. I've seen several people use the 2DS when it was like the wedge shape, whereas now the 2DS XL is actually a very good deal to pick up in its current form. So let's take a look at what we're seeing here. So the first thing they do talk about, which was interesting to me, is the Mini. So the Switch Mini, we've talked about several times as them eliminating the Joy-Con controllers most likely, and they describe this system as a Vita-like system. So one that would eliminate the Joy-Con controllers. And what's interesting about this is they go on to mention that they would actually eliminate the HD rumble and other features. So they would get rid of controller vibration and other features in order to cut costs. And yeah, the HD rumble stuff is probably one of the bigger things that keeps the Joy-Con controllers expensive. And if they're cutting costs, and I think they're trying to get to a sub $200 price point, so, you know, $199, get under there by a penny and it'll look better on store shelves, obviously. You got to start cutting costs somewhere. And I could see them cutting out the rumble, mostly because if it's like a handheld only system, like the Vita as an example, well, that didn't have any rumble features because it's a system you're holding in your hand and it's just vibrating while you're looking at the screen. So I get that. Whereas the Switch, of course, attaches through rails. You can take them off and everything and use Joy-Cons for all kinds of stuff outside of that. So games like 1-2 Switch, of course, wouldn't even make sense on it anyway. That's not to say that you couldn't sync Joy-Con controllers up to it, because I do still think it's going to dock. So I think it'll still plug in and work through a dock and everything, and then it'll just function like a Switch. It just won't have that the portable functionality that the current Switch has, where you can do things like, I guess, like tabletop mode. Like, I'll be curious if this has a kickstand. That's something I'll be really curious about, because if it doesn't, that pretty much tells you what they're aiming for here with this whole thing. The high-end one is interesting. That's one that's going to have the most conversation around it, because now it's going to be all about figuring out, how powerful is this thing going to be? Now, you're going to see, I'm sure, rumored specs thrown around everywhere, but to be honest, the Wall Street Journal couldn't even figure out what's in it, and they're talking to parts suppliers and people with access to a prototype. So if they're talking to those sources and they're not comfortable sharing what's in this thing, even if they got some whispers about it, I don't know if people on the internet would really know as much about this. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you see lists and stuff pop up everywhere with specs and everything, I would look at that as extremely skeptical. I mean, I look at this with obviously a grain of salt, but heavy bags of salt for those when it comes to being skeptical. So what's interesting about this situation with the more expensive Switch, they said you would be wrong to think the enhanced version is similar to what Sony did with PS4 Pro, and the other is just cheap alternative that looks very similar to some past handheld machines, say Sony's PlayStation Vita. So you'd be wrong to think the enhanced version is similar to what Sony did with the PS4 Pro. That is an interesting line. So we know it would be stronger, and I had a feeling that if they did something like that, they would take the Parker chip, a chip that's really not been used in much. I think they used it in the Magic Leap. That's the only place I've really seen it used. And they could have dropped that in, maybe doubled the RAM to 8 gigabytes of RAM, and then they would have a system that would run games better in terms of resolution and frame rate and everything, because the Parker chip is more capable. And that's kind of what I figured they would do. It makes sense for them to do it because it wouldn't be a massive, expensive venture, because they wouldn't be making a full customized chip. And on the other side, it would be kind of like a new 3DS XL upgrade from a 3DS XL. But it's interesting to think that they would also introduce a cheap system alongside of it. I thought we were going to get tiered, cheap and then expensive. But we might get both. And if they're saying you'd be wrong to think the enhanced version is similar to what Sony did with the PS4 Pro, I'm wondering if that means that it's not going to be as big of a jump from the PS4. So PS4 to PS4 Pro was a sizable jump. You know, that was what, 2.5 times the power. And if you go from Xbox One to Xbox One X, is a massive leap. That's what, 4.5 times. I'm wondering if they mean that it won't be as large of a jump in terms of power. But there's also the idea that they're comparing it to the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro. They say it won't be as powerful as the Xbox One X or the PS4 Pro. It's interesting they didn't mention the regular Xbox One or the regular PS4. So I wonder if Nintendo's strategy for this system is to come in right around the Xbox One or even the PS4 base. I feel like they might be trying to get just above what the base Xbox One does now, and then they'll start getting games coming out that are, 900p or something like that across the board and better frame rates, because, of course, the NVIDIA chipset is a bit more current than what's in the Xbox One now. And if they end up going the customized route where they design their own chip alongside of NVIDIA, they can technically change things out as they want and do it how they want. The Xbox, or the X1, the one that's in the Switch now, was pretty much an off-the-shelf part. I mean, it's used in their NVIDIA Shield TV, for example. So I wonder if, because this thing has been such a success, if they're willing to take a shot at, say, a customized chip and use maybe the X2 downclocked heavily in the Switch Mini, maybe. Or maybe they just bring the X1 over there as well. The X1 would work in it and everything, but I'm thinking about kind of battery life. It's a portable-only system. They might want to try to get, 5 to 6 hours of battery out of it for that. But it is an interesting situation here, and I'm trying to just mostly figure out the high-end one. Because the Mini, I don't think is going to be anything crazy. I think it's going to come out, it's going to be cool and everything. It's like, oh, look, this literally is the Vita successor, especially if it looks similar to the Vita, how I'm kind of picturing in my head right now. And that'll go over well. That'll probably sell extremely well in Japan. It'll sell well in the US, much like the 2DS did pretty well just because it's cheap. But that high-end one is where questions are going to be formed around, especially now. How powerful is it? What's it going to come with? Is it going to look the same? Is it going to look different? Is it going to be a Switch system? Is it going to be a full console? That's another question I've seen. People are like, oh, maybe it's not even a Switch. Maybe it's just a console. I think they're going to keep the Switch idea intact. I don't think it's just going to be a console, but it makes you wonder how they're going to do this and what's going to be in it if they're going to keep that similar form factor. Because we know the PS5 and the next Xbox are coming next year at this point. 2020 seems as likely as ever for the next systems to show up. And if Nintendo puts this out and it still does the same thing in terms of playing games, I think it'll be eventually become the system that everyone ends up getting. But that's going to be the other question is, do they have games that only run on this system? The more powerful one, and I feel like the answer to that is no, but we saw them do it with the new 3DS XL, where certain games, we just saw Minecraft, only runs on that system. Xenoblade only runs on that system. So would they leave Switch early adapters who have bought the regular one kind of out in the cold for a big release? I feel like, again, the answer to that is no, because the people who buy the Pro are still going to be in the minority if you look at the regular or even the Mini, because it's cheaper. So I feel like if a game comes out, it has to be able to run on all of them, and you'll just get different results, frame rate, resolution, everything. I cannot wrap my head around them doing that for even a big release, because it wouldn't even make sense for a third-party developer to do that unless there's, millions of these Switch Pros out there. But that's kind of where we are now. We have to look forward to sometime this year if Nintendo's actually going to make that announcement. They gave us, they gave us a timetable. Basically, 2019 is when Nintendo would look to, and that would be technically into the system's third year, so that's beyond what Nintendo would usually do for a handheld refresh. So, everything kind of lines up in that sense, but now it comes down to, are they really going to announce both at the same time, and when would they do it if it's... So if they're saying it could launch as early as the summer, that means that, as we've seen, developers have prototypes in their hands to develop for. Most likely, they're already being manufactured. That's probably why they're kind of making that claim, is that it could be this summer. It's probably already in production. It's probably already going down assembly lines now. So if we are to that point and they announce it at something like E3, that would be pretty interesting. That make the holidays really interesting. That would make those sales chart stuff interesting to see what sells the best. But it would also be exciting for me because I would like a more powerful Switch, and I would buy into that. So it's going to be interesting, though. Let me know what you guys think about this down below. This entire rumor with the Wall Street Journal and multiple Switch units being introduced this year. One being a Mini, one being a more expensive, more powerful Pro. It's interesting times right now, guys. A lot of hardware starting to circulate, and we're going to be talking about the PS5 and the next Xbox soon. Here we are now talking about 2 new Switch units. We got that all-digital Xbox One coming. There's a lot of stuff happening right now, and it's exciting times. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.